We're counting down the 30 breakfasts that fed American lumberjacks before they walked out into the frozen Northwoods for 14 hours of work. In the pine camps of Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Maine, a man swinging an axe in 10 degrees below zero burned somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 calories a day, and every one of them had to come off a plank table before sunrise. The cook was often the highest paid man in camp, higher than the foreman, because a bad cook emptied a bunkhouse faster than bad timber. Expect grease, molasses, salt pork, and portions that would flatten a modern man. Expect a table where talking was forbidden and eating took 11 minutes. Which breakfast tops the list? Let's begin our countdown with number 30. Number 30, camp coffee, boiled black. It came out of a wash boiler the size of a milk can, grounds thrown loose into the water, and boiled hard until the whole thing turned the color of creosote. The cookie cracked an egg in it, shell and all, to settle the grounds, or dropped in a handful of snow if the eggs were gone. Men called it blackjack, and they drank it scalding at 4 in the morning by the tin cup, 3 and 4 cups apiece, standing in the dark with their coats still on. It was bitter enough to make your jaw tighten. Nobody complained. In a camp where the thermometer read 20 below, at breakfast, hot was more important than good, and coffee was the first heat a man felt all day. Number 29, fried cornmeal mush. The cook boiled cornmeal into a thick porridge the night before and poured it into bread pans to set overnight in the cold pantry. By morning it had firmed into a loaf he could slice half an inch thick and lay into pork fat until each slab came out crusted gold on both sides and steaming soft in the middle. Cornmeal cost pennies a pound and swelled to 3 times its weight in water, which made mush the cheapest hot calories a jobber could buy. The men doused the slices in molasses until the plate swam. It sat heavy, and it was supposed to. Sticking to the ribs was not a figure of speech in a camp. It was the whole point of the meal. Number 28, oatmeal with blackstrap. Steel-cut oats went into the kettle at bedtime and sat on the back of the range all night, thickening into something a spoon could stand in. At breakfast, it came to the table in dish pans, gray and gluey, with a crock of blackstrap molasses passed down the plank so each man could carve a well in his portion and flood it. Some poured canned milk over the top. Oats were freight cheap and shipped in barrels, and a single pot fed 40 men for the price of a few loaves of bread. It was not a beloved dish. It was a foundation, the ballast course of the meal, eaten first and fast, so a man could get to the real food behind it. Number 27, stewed prunes, the logging berries. Every camp in the Lake States ran on dried prunes, so much so that the men named them logging berries, camp berries. The cook soaked them overnight and stewed them into a dark, syrupy mess served in enamel bowls at nearly every breakfast of the season. There was a practical reason behind the joke. A winter diet of salt pork, white flour, and beans left men bound up and short on anything green, and dried fruit was the cheapest correction a wanagan could stock. Prunes appeared so relentlessly that men swore they could smell the pot from the bunkhouse door. Number 26, stewed dried apples. Barrels of dried apple rings came north with the fall supply sleighs, light, cheap, and immune to freezing. The cook soaked them overnight and stewed them soft with sugar and a stick of cinnamon if the van had any. And by morning the cook shack smelled like an orchard in a place where the nearest apple tree was 90 miles south. Dried apples had a reputation for swelling, and camp stories claimed a man who ate a full bowl and drank a quart of water had made a serious mistake. Still, the men ate them by the ladleful. After weeks of grease and salt, anything sweet and sharp cut through the fat like a saw through pine. Number 25, baking powder biscuits. Yeast was slow and cold, ruined it, so the cook leaned on baking powder for speed, mixing flour, lard, and salt in a dishpan before dawn, and cutting rounds with the mouth of a tin can. They went into the oven while the coffee boiled and came out in sheets of 24, tops cracked and floury, insides steaming. A good camp cook could turn out 200 before the gut hammer rang. The biscuit was the sponge of the Northwoods breakfast, the tool that got everything else off the plate. A cook whose biscuits came out heavy heard about it in silence, which was worse than complaint. Number 24, Johnny cake. Baked in long sheet pans and cut into squares the size of a hand, Camp Johnny cake was cornmeal, sour milk, a little flour, and whatever fat the cook could spare, browned hard around the edges and crumbling in the middle. It came to the table stacked like shingles. Cornmeal came into camp by the barrel because it kept in a way flour sometimes did not. And it stretched the wheat supply when the sleigh roads went bad and the next load was 2 weeks out. Men buttered it with oleo and buried it in molasses, and swampers packed the leftover squares in their coat pockets to eat at the cutting site. Cold Johnny cake at 11 in the morning, eaten standing in snow, was its own kind of luxury. Number 23, fried potatoes and onions. The potato cellar under the cook shack held bushels banked in straw against the frost, and every morning the cookie stood at the block, dicing them by the pailful. They hit a foot of hot grease on the range top with a sound that carried to the bunkhouse. Onions went in for the last few minutes, sweetening and browning at the edges. Potatoes were the bulk of the breakfast plate in most camps because they were the cheapest thing that filled a man, and a good crew went through 100 pounds a day without ceremony. Men judged a cook by the crust on the bottom of the pan. Pale potatoes meant a lazy hand at the range, and word traveled between camps fast. Number 22, corned beef hash. When a barrel of corned beef came up from the railhead, the cook stretched it a week or more, and hash was the dish that did the stretching. He chopped the salt beef fine with cold-boiled potatoes and onion, packed it into a greased pan, and let the bottom set into a brown crust before turning it in slabs. Hash gave the cook a use for every scrap left in the barrel, and it gave the men the taste of beef in a season built mostly on pork. Some camps crowned each portion with a fried egg when eggs existed. Oral accounts from the Saginaw Valley remembered hash mornings as small holidays and remembered exactly which cooks got the crust right. Number 21, salt cod fish cakes. In the Maine and New Hampshire camps and in the Great Lakes camps run by men who had come west from New England, salt cod was breakfast at least once a week. The cook freshened the boards overnight in water, flaked the fish, mashed it with potato and pepper, shaped patties by the 100, and fried them in pork fat until the outsides went crisp. Dried salt cod kept for a year without ice, which made it the perfect camp protein, and it came cheap by the wooden box. Served with molasses on the side, which sounds strange now and was standard then. Men who had grown up on the coast ate them with something like homesickness. Everyone else ate them because they were hot. Number 20, pea soup at daybreak. In camps full of French-Canadian choppers, and there were many across Maine, Michigan, and northern Wisconsin, the yellow pea soup pot never came off the stove. Split peas, a hunk of salt pork, onion, and hours of low heat produced something thick enough to hold a spoon upright. It was served at breakfast without apology, ladled beside the eggs and potatoes, because a bowl of it at 4:30 sat in a man like a stone in the best way. Camp records show peas moving north by the 100-weight every fall. The men called the thickest batches soupe au pois that would stand your spoon, and they measured the cook's affection by how much pork he had let slip into the pot. Number 19, sawmill gravy over biscuits. After the pork came out of the pans, the cook threw flour into the leftover fat, stirred it dark, and poured in canned milk until the whole thing turned into a thick, speckled, pepper-heavy gravy that went over everything on the table. It cost almost nothing and turned dry biscuits into a meal that could carry a man to noon. The name stuck from mill and camp cookhouses across the country. Ladled generously It made a plate of plain food taste rich. Old lumberjacks remembered the gravy pitchers going down the plank table hand to hand, never set down, never empty, all through the 11 minutes a breakfast lasted. Number 18. Camp sausage. When a hog was butchered at a bigger operation, or when the fall supply run brought crocks of country sausage sealed under lard, breakfast changed for a week. The cook shaped patties as wide as a saucer and fried them in their own fat until the edges caught. Sage and black pepper filled the cook shack in a way that pulled men out of the bunks early. Sausage was a treat rather than a staple, because fresh pork did not keep and lard-sealed crocks were heavy freight. Camp cooks used it as a morale tool. A wise cook saved the sausage for the coldest week of January, when the crew was worn down and the timber was hard and the whole camp felt it. Number 17. Fried ham. A smoked ham hung in the cook shack was a bank account. It kept without ice, it sliced thin, and it gave 40 men the taste of real meat off 2 or 3 pounds. The cook cut it into slabs and laid them in a dry pan until the fat curled and the edges caramelized, then poured a splash of coffee into the pan to lift the brown from the bottom and made a thin, salty gravy from it. Men mopped it with bread. Ham mornings meant the camp was well provisioned and the season was going well, and men read the cook shack the way sailors read weather. Where the hams hung low and plentiful, the outfit was solvent and the wages would be there in spring. Number 16. Beefsteak before dawn. In camps close enough to a settlement to buy fresh beef, or those that kept a steer through the fall, steak appeared on the breakfast table without anyone finding it odd. It was round and chuck, pounded flat, floured, and fried hard in pork fat until it was gray through, then buried under onions. Nobody in a logging camp wanted rare meat at 4 in the morning. They wanted something to chew on for 14 hours. A steak breakfast was a wage in itself, and jobbers competing for good sawyers advertised their tables as much as their pay. Men chose camps by the food. In a season of scarce hands, a beef steer bought more loyalty than another $1 a month. Number 15. Hen fruit, the fried egg. Eggs came into camp packed in barrels of oats or crocks of water glass, hauled over ice roads, and everyone that survived the trip was a small victory. The men called them hen fruit. The cook fried them in pork grease by the dozen on a griddle already black with the morning's work, edges lacing brown and crisp, and the cookie carried them out in stacks of tin plates. 2 or 3 apiece was a good morning. In a lean camp, eggs showed up on Sunday and nowhere else. There is a reason old photographs show cooks posed proudly beside egg crates. Fresh eggs in February, 90 miles from a railhead, were the closest thing the Northwoods had to a delicacy. Number 14, sinkers, the lard-fried donut. Every good camp cook made donuts, and he made them by the wash tub. Dough went into a kettle of hot lard, rings and knots surfacing brown and glossy, and the cookie hauled them out with a stick and piled them by the 100 in dishpans on the table. They were called sinkers, and men ate 4 and 5 at a sitting, dunked in blackjack coffee until they went soft. Nothing carried a man through the cold like a fist of fried dough. Cooks made extra so the crew could load their coat pockets on the way out the door. Cold sinkers, thawed against a man's chest and eaten at the cutting site, are the single most remembered food in Northwoods logging memoirs. Number 13, dried apple pie at 5 in the morning. P.I. was not dessert in a logging camp. Pie was a course, and it turned up at breakfast as reliably as at supper. The cook rolled crusts by the dozen, filled them with the same stewed dried apples soaking in the crock, dusted them with sugar and cinnamon, and baked them in the same oven that had just cleared the biscuits. Wedges came to the table still warm at 4:30. A camp cook was judged first on pie, and men who could not agree on politics, religion, or which river drove hardest would agree instantly on whether a cook's crust was any good. Some outfits promised pie at every meal in their hiring bills, and they meant it. Number 12, steamed brown bread with raisins. Carried west by New England men, brown bread was cornmeal, rye, and molasses, steamed for hours in lard pails, set in a kettle of water on the back of the range, then turned out as dark cylinders that sliced into wheels. Studded with raisins and slathered with oleo, it was dense, sweet, and faintly sour. Steaming meant the cook could make bread without competing for oven space during the morning rush, which mattered when one range served 40 men. It came out nearly black and kept for days. Men liked it cold as well as hot, and it went into the noon pails alongside cold pork. It was old-fashioned even then, and men loved it for exactly that reason. Number 11, molasses cookies in the nose bag. Before the crew left the table, the cookie moved down the plank with a dishpan of molasses cookies the size of a saucer, hard, dark, and faintly gingered, and every man took 2 or 3 for his pocket. That pocket was the nose bag, the noon meal a chopper carried into the timber when the cutting was too far out for the sled to reach. Cookies made from molasses, lard, and flour cost almost nothing and survived a morning of being sat on and frozen solid. Men gnawed them at the stump. Old Jacks recalled the specific ache of a cookie frozen too hard to bite, held against the belly under a mackinaw until it softened enough to eat. Number 10, rice with raisins. Rice came north by the sack because it was cheap, light, and nearly indestructible, and the cook boiled it in milk with sugar and a fistful of raisins into something halfway between a porridge and a pudding. Left in the pantry overnight, it set thick, and in the morning it was cut and served in squares or scooped hot beside the eggs. The men called it any number of things, most of them unprintable, and ate every grain. Sweet, soft, and warm, it was the closest thing a bunkhouse breakfast came to comfort. Camp cooks used it the way a modern kitchen uses a filler dish, to stretch a lean week, and nobody at that table ever objected to being filled. Number 9, canned milk, the tinned cow. Fresh milk was impossible in most camps. There was no barn, no time, and no way to keep it, so evaporated and condensed milk came in by the case and sat open on the table in punctured tins. It went into the coffee, over the oatmeal, into the gravy, and into the rice. Sweetened condensed was thick enough that men spooned it straight onto bread when the cook was not watching. The tinned cow, they called it. It kept indefinitely, it froze without ruin, and it turned bitter camp coffee into something a man could drink 4 cups of. For thousands of lumberjacks who never saw a dairy from November to April, that punch tin was the only cream they knew. Number 8, pickled beets and onions. It looks strange on a breakfast table now. It was not strange then. Crocks of pickled beets, cucumbers, and raw sliced onions in vinegar sat out at every meal, including the 4 in the morning one, and men ate them beside their eggs without a thought. There was hard sense in it. Months of pork, flour, and beans with no fresh vegetables produced sore gums and slow healing, and pickled produce and dried fruit were the cheap defenses the cook had. The vinegar bite also cut the grease that coated every other thing on the plate. Camp cooks preserved barrels of it in the fall for exactly this reason. Sour food at dawn was medicine that no one had to be told to take. Number 7, venison, partridge, and whatever the woods gave up. Officially, most camps did not hunt. In practice, a bull cook with a rifle, a teamster with a snare line, and a crew of men living inside a forest produced a good deal of meat that never appeared in any ledger. Venison was ground into hash, fried into steaks, or stewed down with onions, and partridge went into the pan whole. Fresh meat broke the monotony of salt pork in a way that men remembered for 50 years afterward. It also arrived unpredictably, which made it feel like a gift. Old accounts describe whole bunkhouses waking to the smell of deer liver frying at 3 in the morning and considering it the finest breakfast of the entire winter. Number 6, oleomargarine, the camp butter. Real butter was expensive and did not travel well over 60 miles of ice road, so most outfits bought oleomargarine by the tub, pale as candle wax and sold cheap. The cook set it out in bowls down the length of the table, and it went on everything: biscuits, brown bread, johnny cake, potatoes, and the crust of the pie. Some camps colored it yellow, some did not bother. Men who had never tasted anything else thought it was fine. Men who had grown up on a farm complained bitterly and ate it anyway. It was fat, and fat was fuel, and a man who was about to spend 14 hours in 20 below weather learned to stop being particular about the source. Number 5. Cookhouse bread by the 100 loaves. In the black hours before the crew woke, the cook worked dough on a floured plank the size of a door, and by breakfast, the shelves held loaves in rows, crusts cracking as they cooled. A 40-man camp went through 80 to 100 loaves a week, and the cook baked most days of his life without a scale, judging by feel, and by the heat of a stove he had learned like a language. Bread came to the table in slabs, cut thick as a Bible. Men ate it with pork, with gravy, with molasses, and stuffed it in their pockets. Nothing in the camp record inspires more affection in the memoirs than a cook who could bake. Number 4. Beanhole beans. Outside the cook shack door was a pit lined with stones, and in it went a covered iron pot of navy beans, salt pork, molasses, and mustard, buried under coals and earth at supper time and dug out at 4 the next morning. 14 hours underground turned them dark, glossy, and sweet, with the pork gone to silk. Beans were the cheapest concentrated protein money could buy, and a well-managed bean hole fed a camp without occupying the range during the breakfast rush. Every camp claimed its cook made the best. Men ate them for breakfast, packed the leftovers cold in their noon pails, and ate them again at supper. And the crews on the biggest drives ran on almost nothing else. Number 3. Blackstrap molasses, the long sweetening. Sugar was expensive and shipped in fussy barrels. Molasses came in kegs, poured slow, cost a fraction as much, and never spoiled, and so it became the sweetness of the entire Northwoods. Men called it long sweetening to distinguish it from the short sweetening of granulated sugar. It went over flapjacks, into oatmeal, on bread, in beans, over cornmeal mush, in cookies, in brown bread, and in a pinch into the coffee. Its dark, faintly bitter, iron-edged flavor is the taste that survivors of the camps described most often when they were old men. A keg stood by the table with a spigot. Nobody rationed it. It was the one thing at breakfast a man could take all he wanted. Number 2. Buckwheat cakes from the perpetual crock. Behind the range sat a crock of sourdough batter that the cook had started in November and would not let die until the spring drive. Every night he fed it buckwheat flour and water, and every morning he drew off what he needed, leaving the rest to work in the warmth. Buckwheat grew on poor northern ground cheap, and produced a cake that was dark, tangy, and dense in a way that wheat could not touch. The men counted them in stacks, not pieces. Cooks defended those crocks like family, and stories persist of a cook hauling his starter home at the end of a season, carrying a wooden crock on his lap 40 miles by sleigh. And finally, in first place, sourdough, flapjacks, and fried salt pork. This was the breakfast. 200 pounds of salt pork came into camp in barrels every season, and every morning it was sliced thick, scalded to pull the salt, floured and fried until the edges went crisp and the fat ran clear. That fat greased the griddle, and onto the griddle went the sourdough batter, ladled in rounds the size of a dinner plate, 40 and 50 at a time, flipped by a cookie who had done it so many thousand times he no longer looked down. The stacks came to the table 6 and 8 high, and the men flooded them with molasses and ate them in near total silence because talking at meals was forbidden in nearly every camp in the Lake States. The rule kept men eating instead of arguing, and it got a crew out of the door in 11 minutes. A chopper might put away 8 cakes, 4 slices of pork, potatoes, beans, and 3 cups of blackjack, then walk out into the dark at 10 below with a nosebag of cold pork and cookies and not eat again until noon. The Paul Bunyan stories exaggerated everything about the camps except this: the griddles really were enormous, the appetites really were bottomless, and the flapjack, cheap, hot, sweet, and endless, is the single food that fed the felling of the greatest pine forest this continent ever had. Across all 30 entries, one thing runs through every plate: fat, sugar, and salt, in quantities that would alarm any doctor now, kept men alive in conditions that would kill most of us in a week. The lumberjack breakfast was not a meal. It was fuel loaded before a 14-hour shift in a frozen forest, cooked in the dark by a man who woke at 3 so that 40 others could work at 5. The pine is gone, the camps are gone, and the plank tables have long since fallen silent. But the smell of pork fat and molasses at 4 in the morning built an empire out of timber. Which of these 30 would you actually eat? Tell me in the comments.